fun, and I'm gonna do it. That's fine. I didn't do my anything. I didn't do my eyebrows.
There.
All of my eye bags look fine today. I don't have any. That's so great. Okay, I didn't do my eyebrows though. I didn't do shit. I didn't do word.
I put deodorant on and brushed my hair. That's all I did today.
Sick. I didn't even do the brushing the hair part.
Well, your
I
hair's a
brushed
lot
my
shorter than
teeth.
mine.
I brushed my teeth, and then I put my contacts in, and that was it. That was it, and then I put deodorant on, and then that was it, and then that's how we've been fucking around the whole day.
I threw a load in the dryer, or in the washer, and then I'm like,
my eyes are red though. That's not great. I didn't put any concealer in. It's like in my waterline.
Oh, okay. But I'm like, your eyeballs themselves ain't red.
And I was like,
So
cool,
I thought you were worried
great.
about.
I like that I have a light over here, so I have one visible eye bag, and then it looks like I did something with this side of my face. That's just light.
I love it.
That's that. Hi.
I love it.
Hi, I'm glad y'all are here. Dad's here. Dad's here, because I'm not doing super hot, and also there's a part in the thing that he's got to do because I can't do it. So Dad's here. End of story. That was it. That was the entire explanation. I don't... Anyway, good to see you. Sorry we skipped a week. Thank you for being considerate of my mental health. More so than I am sometimes considerate of my mental health. So I appreciate all of you guys. And everybody who gave me help with a lot of the paperwork and phone calls and legal stuff that I gotta deal with. Super appreciate you. You guys are the MVPs. For sure. I should have gotten more coffee before I sat down. And I didn't because I was preoccupied with rice.
I will share coffee with you.
But I have water. I have water. But if I run out of water, then I may ask you if I can have some of your coffee.
That's fine. I'm willfully
Dad made a delicious coffee
it.
and scones.
I did.
My coffee. Yeah, go get it before we start, because once we start, you're not allowed to get up. I mean that. You were locked into whatever position you were in. I'm invoking cat law. Even if there is no cat, you have to stay there. Once we start, you're not allowed to move. Thank you. I'm taking that as a compliment. It was the bones, the mudslide. Yeah, Dad put... What'd you put in it?
I put in County Cork creamer from Ireland, and it's alcoholic. So it's a little boozy.
Boozy. Yeah, it sounds... Yes. It's a new law that I just made up. That you're just going to have to deal with now. So... If you don't know what you do here, or what we do here, and you've never been here before, this is a book club, so if you don't like books or reading, this probably isn't going to be your bag, and that's fine. You can leave. But we're on our way through Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and we're on Map of Days. And so, if you want to catch up, you can find all the rest of it on my YouTube, but today we're on chapter 9, so if you have no idea what's happening and you don't want spoilers, I would leave before we get started. And some notes before we get started. I can't do some things anymore. I just don't have the capability to do so, and doing so would probably knock me out for the remainder of the chapter, vocal range-wise. I would have vocal fry so bad. And, you know me, when I get vocal fry, I start coughing. So, we don't want that to happen. I've been on the edge of it several times, but I know for sure I read something, and I was like, there's no way I am doing that particular thing. So Dad's gonna do it.
Hooray.
So Dad's gonna do it. I volunteered him for the position.
I got voluntold, and I'm okay with it.
He got voluntold to do it. You'll know it when we get there. Because I'm just going to hand the book to him, and then he's going to do it.
I'm just going to apologize right now.
Oh, I would have to. I would have to make like a public YouTuber apology if I tried to do this thing because it's not. It would not be. I don't even know. I feel like a. Anyway. Hi, Kalika. Good to see you. And then, depending on how far we get, if we can get through 2 chapters, we're going to. But I gotta warn you. Go ahead. Trigger warning. The second chapter deals with some racist topics. And if you are uncomfortable with historically Deep South, then I'll warn you before we start the chapter because it's pretty much it. So we're gonna do that possibly this week. I don't know. We might have to save it the next week. If so, I will remind you of the topics next week. So if that is something you are sensitive to, yeah. Also from the South, and the South makes me uncomfortable. So, in any case, I'll pre-warn you before we get there. So I will issue a reminder before we get into it. But it doesn't do anything too heavy, but it does kind of, if you've ever seen Lovecraft Country, it very much gives the scene from the diner just a tad bit. It doesn't get as bad, but it gets borderline.
Touchy.
And Enoch is slightly insensitive. And then that's it. But I did want to warn you in case there are any people of color in the chat that might feel uncomfortable, or you're just uncomfortable because you're from the Deep South and racism also makes you uncomfortable. Makes me uncomfortable. But I figured I would do that. And Dad's going to sing vibrato. That's what's going on this week. That's what...
Oh, you're good. You're good.
They are contacts. I have prescription contacts, and I chose purple because
Purple.
Otherwise, I'd be sitting here with glasses, and you'd be able to see like literally nothing but the ring light in the reflection of the eyeballs. So I always wear contacts. So yes, they are contacts, but they're my favorite ones, and thank you. I'm glad you like them. And also just because purple is my favorite color.
Because purple.
Purple, black, and gray. The ace flag, essentially, is my favorite color.
That should have been a hint.
Rude. No.
I'm Dad. That's what I do.
No, that would be Dad. Dads aren't necessarily rude. You just took that upon yourself. Anyway. Who is ready to get into it? Or do we have any other top of show news? Dad, you got news?
No.
Okay, it led with a hard so I figured it was no. All right. Let's go. All right, Map of Days, Chapter 9. Paul led us into a long, covered porte-cochere that led through the parking lot to the inner courtyard of the motel. We ventured inside, Bronwyn pushing the car behind us. At the halfway point, I felt a quickening, and in a flash, the dusk before us turned to daylight. We came out into a cool, bright morning and a neat, paved courtyard that was ringed by motel rooms, which were day-glow pink and almost new. Now there were no tarps on the roof. The pools sparkled with blue water, and the junk cars in the parking lot were gone, replaced with cars from the 50s and 60s in terrific shape. That's when we must have been, the late 60s or early 70s. A loop entrance built to accommodate cars, Millard said. How modern. I ran ahead to catch up with Paul. Okay, we're here. Now, will you answer our questions? You'd better ask Miss Billy, he said. She runs the place. He led us across the courtyard toward a bungalow that was set apart from the rest and had a sign next to it that read, "Office." "Leave that," Paul said to Bronwyn. "No one will bother it." She stopped pushing the Aston and jogged to catch up with the group. There were other people here, on this side of the loop. A couple of old men sat by the pool doing crossword puzzles and lowered their papers to stare as we passed by. A curtain in another bungalow moved and a woman's face peered through the window at us. "Miss Billy?" Paul said, knocking on the door to the office. He opened it and gestured for us to go inside. "These people broke down?" We filed into a room with a registration desk and a few chairs. The woman Paul had addressed was sitting in one. She was an older white lady, and she wore a nice dress and lipstick and held 3 miniature poodles in her lap, her arms encircling them protectively. "Oh, Lord," the woman said in a thick southern accent. The poodles trembled. She made no move to get up. "Anyone see him come in?" "I don't think so," said Paul. "What about the highwaymen?" "No sign of them." If the highwaymen were those guys in the police car, Paul had just lied for us. I wasn't sure why, but I was grateful nonetheless. "I don't like it," Miss Billy said, shaking her head firmly. "It's a risk. Every time it's a risk. But so long as you're here." She lowered her horn-rimmed glasses a bit and looked at us. "Don't reckon I can just throw you to the wolves now, can I?" "If you'll excuse me," Paul said. "I've got some things to tend to." Paul went out. Miss Billy kept her eyes locked on us. "You ain't gonna turn old on me, are you? I got enough old folks here as it is, and if you're fixing to die, you can just go on and do it somewhere else." "We're not gonna die," I said. "We just have some questions." "Such as, are you the headmistress here?" said Bronwyn. Miss Billy frowned. "Head what?" "An Imbrin," said Bronwyn. "Oh, Lordy," Miss Billy said, rearing back in her chair. "Do I really look that old?" "She's a demi-Imbrin," Emma said. "It's like a Imbrin light," I explained to our friends. "I'm the manager, and that's enough," said Miss Billy. "I collect the money and try to keep the place from falling down. Rex stops in every few weeks to wind the clock." She pointed to a grandfather clock that stood against the opposite wall. Old, massive, and incongruously ornate, it looked out of place amid the gaudy motel decor. "Rex?" I said. "Rex Prosselwaite, loopkeeper extraordinaire. He does plumbing and a little electrical too, though he ain't licensed." "Let me get this straight. You don't have an Imbrin here, and the fake one only stops by every few weeks?" "Only he can wind it. Or another loopkeeper, I suppose. But Rex works the whole northern part of Florida, so the pickings are mighty slim." "Well, what if he gets sick?" asked Millard. "Or dies," said Enoch. "He ain't allowed to." "What is this thing, anyway?" said Enoch, stepping toward the clock. "I've never seen a—" All 3 dogs began to yap loudly. "Don't you go near that," Miss Billy snapped. Enoch spun away from it. "I was only looking." "Don't look at it neither," said Miss Billy. "Can't have you messing with my loop clock, boy. You can knock everything at a whack." Enoch folded his arms and fumed. I figured it was time to get down to business, so once the dog stopped barking, I said, "I've got something for you." I held out the package from H, the one marked Flaming Man. She peered at it over the rim of her glasses. "What is it?" "I don't know, but if you're the manager, then I think it's for you." She wrinkled her brow. "You open it." I tore the paper open. I'd been dying to see what was inside ever since H had given it to me. It was a pouch of dog treats. Big flavor, big fun, read the label. You've got to be joking, muttered Emma. Miss Billy's face lit up. How nice! These are the girls' favorite. The dogs saw the pouch and started squirming. Miss Billy snatched it from me and held it high above their heads. Don't be greedy. We went through all that to deliver some dog food, said Enoch. Not just any old dog food, said Miss Billy, turning to drop the pouch into her purse as the dogs' noses followed it. You're not curious who it's from? Said Emma. I know who it's from. When you see him, thank him kindly for me and tell him he's back on my Christmas list. Now, she squeezed the dogs tight to her chest and stood up with them held against her. I gotta take the girls for a tinkle, so here's the rules of my place. Number 1, don't touch my clock. Number 2, we don't like noise or commotion here, so don't go making any. Number 3, there's a filling station with a garage next door where you can work on your busted car. When you're done, I expect you to be gone. There's no vacancy. She turned to go. Have you got anything for us? I asked. She frowned. Like what? A clue? I said. We're looking for a portal. At the very least, I'd hoped she might give me something useful in return for the package. A section of map, a postcard with an address on it, something that could help us find our next destination. Oh, honey, if you don't have a clue, I'm afraid I can't help you, she laughed out loud. Now go on, I've got to walk the girls. If you want a picture, actually, I'll go ahead and show this before I start the next section. There you go. There's Miss Bailey. There's this old lady with a bunch of poodles. Out in the courtyard, the residents of Flamingo Manor watched us through their blinds as we talked by the deserted swimming pool. Dog food, Bronwyn said. I can't believe it. The contents of the package hardly matter, said Enoch. Only that we delivered it. He wants to know he can rely on us, I said. Paul came over to where we were standing. I've talked to the garage next door, he said, pointing to a building beyond the Flamingos' bungalows. They have some spare parts, though I don't know about any carburetors. Even a socket wrench would be better than nothing, Enoch replied. Thanks. Paul nodded and hurried off again, and we huddled up to plan our next move. What about the next place? This portal? Asked Bronwyn. How do we find it? We'll ask around, said Emma. Somebody's bound to know. Unless H sent us here for no reason, said Enoch, other than to test our patience. He wouldn't have, Emma said. Enoch kicked a beach ball that was lying at his feet. It went flying into the pool. Maybe you're not used to having tricks played on you, but it's just the sort of thing Abe would have done. To me, anyway. And this bloke worked for him. With him, said Emma, who was still soured the moment anyone criticized my grandfather. Same thing. Just go and fix the car, she shouted. That's the only reason you're here, isn't it? Enoch looked stung. Come on, Bronwyn, he mumbled. The Queen's giving orders again. He and Bronwyn went to the car. Enoch got in, pointed to the garage, and shouted, "Mush!" Bronwyn shook her head and sighed. "I'd better get a double helping of supper after all this," she said, then put her hands on the bumper and started pushing. "Well, hello, young man. Hello, young lady." I turned to see a smiling man striding towards me. He wrapped a big calloused hand around mine and we shook. "Adelaide Pollard, very pleased to meet you." He was a tall black man in a beautiful blue suit and a matching hat. He looked about 70, but might have been older, this being a loop. "Adelaide," said Emma, smiling like I'd never seen her smile at a stranger. "That's not a usual name." "Well, I'm not a usual man. What brings you all to our little neck of the swamp?" "We stopped at a place called Mermaid Fantasyland," said Millard, and I saw Adelaide's face cloud. "I think they tried to put a spell on us or some such thing." "We got away," said Emma, "but then some policemen followed us, and pretty soon after that, our car broke down." "I'm real sorry to hear that," he said. "It's just sad. People pulling this stuff on their own kind. Just sad."
"Who are they?"
Emma said. "Nothing but slimy reprobates," he said. "They try to lure out-of-town peculiars who don't know better into their little trap, and then they sell 'em to the highwaymen."
"You mean the cops?"
I said. "Pretend cops. They're like a gang, you could say. They go up and down the highway, harassing folks, stealing, playing like they own the whole country. Ain't nothing but thugs and shakedown artists. Used to be we only had those shadow monsters to worry about." An old white man in a wheelchair came up behind Adelaide. The left leg of his pants was rolled up and pinned, and he held an ashtray in his lap, into which he tapped a lit cigar. "I swear, sometimes I miss 'em. Ever since the monsters disappeared, these highwaymen have been running wild. They think they can do whatever they like." He puffed his cigar through the gap in his missing front teeth. "Al Potts, by the way." He gave us a little salute. "Mr. Potts, to you." "I'm just as sorry as hell about this, young people," said Adelaide. "You seem very nice."
"We are," said Millard, "but we'll be all right."
"We are, he says," Adelaide laughed. "I like that." Mr. Potts leaned over and spat through his teeth onto the ground. "You laugh too damn much, Adelaide." Adelaide ignored him. "It's a shame," he said. "This was a nice place once. Nice peculiars like you used to come here to have a good time. Now people just wash up like flotsam and get stuck." "I ain't stuck," said Mr. Potts. "I'm retired." "Sure, Al, you tell yourself that."
"What happened to the Imbryn who made this loop?" Millard asked. "Why didn't she stay around to help protect it?"
Adelaide looked at me and whistled. "Imbryn. When's the last time you heard that word, Al?" "Long time ago," said Mr. Potts. "I haven't seen one in 40 years, said Adelaide, his voice softening with nostalgia. "A real one, I mean. Not one of these halfsies who can't even shapeshift."
"Where did they all go?"
Emma asked. "They weren't all that many to begin with," said Mr. Potts. "I remember back in the 50s, the loop up in Indiana where I lived shared an imprint with the next closest loop, Miss Pigeonhawk. Then one day it seemed like the whites and their shadow creatures were everywhere, all of a sudden, and they just hated imprints worse than poison. They tried everything they could to get rid of them, did a pretty good job of it too."
How? Said Emma. We had hollows and whites in Europe since 1908, and they hated our Imbrans just as much, but most of ours managed to survive.
Can't say I'm an expert on how the whites operate, said Adelaide. But I'll say this. Our Imbrans were every bit as rough and smart as anyone else's, if not more. I'd trust an American Imbran with my life, if I could find one. So it's not that they lacked metal.
And instead, you have a so-called loop keeper, said Millard, sounding doubtful.
Old Rex, said Potts. Passable keeper, terrible drunk.
He drinks? Millard said.
Like a tent preacher, said Adelaide. Rex comes every few weeks to fiddle with the loop clock. Day turns to night and so on.
And then he finishes off a bottle of Miss Billy's homemade rye, said Potts, which I believe is how she pays him. Emma turned to Millard and said, Have you ever heard of such a thing? Only apocryphally, he replied.
Adelaide clapped his hands. Have you all eaten? I got a pot of coffee on in my room, and Al always has a few crullers stashed away.
You leave my crullers alone, said Potts.
These young people are having a bad day, Al. Get the crullers. Potts grumbled something under his breath. Adelaide walked us across the courtyard to his room. We passed a bungalow where a woman was singing opera loudly behind a closed door. You're sounding fine this morning, Baroness, Adelaide shouted.
Hey, you!
The woman sang back.
Is it just me, Emma whispered, or is everyone here a little...
Nuts, said Potts, broke out cackling. Yes, we are, honey. Yes, we are.
Wow, his hearing's good, I said.
Eyes are shut, said Potts, pushing past us on his wheelchair. But the ears still work. Here's a picture of Adelaide. Everybody's giving you snaps. You got 2 more lines. That's it.
Fantastic.
Not a lot of lines, but there's a couple. They're all singing.
Now, of course.
And then there's
Yes.
Al.
The definition of an opera is nothing but singing, no spoken words. I love Potts.
A crotchety old guy.
It's me.
We had coffee and crullers around a little table in the living room of Adelaide's bungalow, a tiny space appointed with a floral patterned sofa and chair, a knob-operated TV bolted to the wall, and flowers in vases. I noticed he had a suitcase packed by the door, and I asked about it. "Oh, I'm leaving," Adelaide said. Potts laughed.
So you keep saying.
"Any day now." I glanced at Potts. Potts shook his head. "Headed to Kansas City," said Adelaide, "to see an old girlfriend."
You ain't going nowhere, said Potts. You're stuck here just like the rest of us.
It reminded me of that nursing home where we used to visit my grandma on my mom's side who had Alzheimer's. Leaving was all she talked about, but of course she never could.
We're supposed to find a portal, I said. Have you heard of one around here?
Adelaide looked at Potts, who grunted and shook his head. "I sure haven't," said Adelaide.
There's no such thing as portals, said Millard. "We're just going to keep getting the same answer. It's a dead end."
"You all should talk to the Baroness," said Adelaide. "Or Weiss, our non-engineering bodybuilder. Those two have been everywhere."
"We will," I said. "Thanks."
We ate our crullers in silence for a minute or two. Then Bronwyn set her coffee mug down loudly and said,
"I hope I'm not being too forward, but what are your gentlemen's peculiarities?"
Adelaide coughed and looked down, and Potts pretended he hadn't heard the question.
"What say we go outside and get some sun?"
he said. My friends and I looked at one another. It was an odd moment. We went outside. Paul was walking by. "Young man," said Adelaide, raising an arm and waving. Paul came over. He had a slim, knotted tree limb under one arm and a knife in his hand.
"Yes, sir?"
"These people want to find, what is it again?"
"Portal," said Emma.
"Oh," said Paul, nodding. "Sure." He didn't seem confused at all. Totally normal thing to be looking for.
"Really?"
I said. "Well, we better get back to it," said Adelaide, and he grabbed the handles of Pot's wheelchair and began to push. "Good luck to you all."
"Thanks for the food," Bronwyn said. "Sorry if I made you uncomfortable."
I cringed. They pretended they hadn't heard that either and disappeared into Adelaide's bungalow. We turned back to Paul, trying to put the momentary awkwardness behind us.
"You say you know where the portal is,"
Emma said. "Surely do," he replied. "That's where I'm from."
"You're from a portal," said Millard. "There's no such thing as—"
"I'm from Portal," said Paul. "The town. Portal? Georgia?" "There's a town called Portal?" I said. "It's not famous or anything, but yeah."
"Where is it? Can you show us on a map?"
"Surely can, but is it the town you want or the loop that's nearby? There ain't much to the town." I broke into a grin. "The loop, definitely." "Then that's a different story. You can't get to the loop without me."
"I'm a certified cartographer," said Millard. "I'm sure I can handle even the most complex directions."
"It's not a matter of directions. The location of the entrance changes." Millard snorted.
"It changes?"
"Only peculiars in my persuasion can find it. Diviners." "Well, could you take us there?" I asked. I don't know."
"Come on," said Emma. "We're good company."
"I don't much like to travel. Besides, it isn't a nice trip."
"What's so bad about it?"
I asked. He shrugged. "It's just not so nice." "Matchstick, I need you." It was Enoch, his arms painted in grease to the elbows. He darted toward Emma like he was going to wipe filth on her new clothes, and she squealed and leapt out of range. He laughed, then started back toward the garage. Emma's shirt had come partly untucked. She fixed it, glaring after him.
"Idiot."
We followed Enoch toward the garage. So did Paul, whose curiosity about what we were up to apparently overwhelmed whatever awkwardness he felt about denying our request. As we were making our way across the parking lot, Bronwyn said,
"Did I cross a line back there, asking those old fellows about their peculiarities?
Peculiar abilities are like muscles, Millard replied. If you don't use them for a long time, they can atrophy. Perhaps they've none left, and you hit a nerve. It wasn't that, said Paul. They weren't allowed.
What do you mean? Said Emma.
The gang in charge made a law that nobody can use peculiarities but them. They even hire snitches. Make sure nobody does.
My God, said Millard. What kind of country is this?
A cruel one, said Emma. Paul sighed. Is there any other kind?
Poor Paul.
The sign said Ed's Garage, but it just looked like an old barn to me. There was nobody around. The loot must have been made on a Sunday or a holiday. Bronwyn had pushed the Aston into an empty bay lined with tools, and Enoch nearly had the car running now. There was some metal to be welded, he said, and for that he needed Emma's fire to finish the job. It took several minutes of sustained effort, pacing and rubbing her hands together, for Emma to make her hands hot enough to weld metal. They were nearly white, and so dangerous she had to hold them well away from her body, lest her clothes catch fire. We stood back while she leaned under the hood and sparks flew. It was so noisy and fascinating that only when she'd finished, sweat pouring down her face and breathing hard, did we hear angry shouts coming from the motel. We dashed out of the garage. The same vintage police car that had harassed us earlier was now parked in the Flamingo's forecourt with its doors flung open. Looks like the highwayman tracked you down, said Paul. You all better run. Take the back way out. He pointed to a road that led behind the garage and out of town.
We can't leave all of them at the mercy of those thugs, said Millard.
What? Said Enoch. Of course we can. Just then, one of the fake cops dragged Miss Billy through the courtyard by her arm, her 3 poodles yapping crazily and nipping at his heels.
If you can spare me for one moment, said Bronwyn, I'm going to go and break that man's jaw.
It's no use fighting them, said Paul. It just makes them madder. They'll come back with more people and more guns, and it'll be even worse.
There's always use in fighting, said Emma, especially when it makes terrible people cry.
She laced her fingers together and popped her knuckles, and sparks flew from her still glowing hands.
Enoch, how's the car running?
Good as new, he said.
Jolly. Keep it idling for us. She turned to me. Back in 2 shakes. She turned to Bronwyn. Coming?
Bronwyn rolled her shoulders and shook her arms, limbering up, then nodded. I secretly loved it when Emma got like this, so pissed off that she grew oddly calm, her anger a focused tool she could wield to great and destructive effect. She and Bronwyn started walking toward the motel. The rest of us weren't going to stay behind, of course, but since Emma and Bronwyn were the ones among us most capable of wreaking havoc, we kept a few paces behind them. In the forecourt, one of the highwaymen had Miss Billy by the wrist and was shouting questions at her while the other one rampaged from bungalow to bungalow. "They was here, I know it," he shouted and burst out of Adelaide's place. "Every one of you who's lying is going to wish to hell they hadn't. You know the punishment for disobeying orders." They didn't look much like cops on closer inspection. They were wearing green fatigue pants and army boots, and they had the buzz-cut hair and dumb, overconfident swagger I'd come to know well growing up in Florida. The shorter of the two wore a gun holster on his hip. "Disobeying orders is even worse than not paying your protection fees," the taller one shouted. "Next time your clock needs winding."
maybe old Rex don't turn up. You leave him alone, cried Miss Billy. He drew back his arm to slap her, but stopped short when the smaller one said, "There they is, Darrell." His mouth formed an O as he pointed to us. "Well, well, well," said Darrell. He let Miss Billy go. She scurried off behind the pool rules sign. We came into the forecourt and stopped where it met the pool. There were about 20 feet separating us. Emma and Bronwyn stood at the front of our little group, Enoch and I at the back. Millard was silent and, I hoped, sneaking around to flank the highwaymen. I kept Paul behind me. "Y'all must be new in town," said Darrell. He cleared his throat loudly. "Road you was on is a toll road." "What's the toll today, Jackson?" "Gets a sight higher if you try and skip out on it." Jackson joined the other highwaymen at their squad car, leaning against the door, and hooked his thumbs into his holster belt. He'd been looking us up and down, and he didn't seem worried about what he saw. His lips broadened into a greasy smile. "How about their cash and their wheels?" He nodded toward the garage. "Why, I think I seen one of those babies in a magazine." I could see the residents of Flamingo Manor peeking out through their blinds like a scene in an old Western movie. "You can go to hell," Emma said. Now Darrell was smiling too. "Bless her heart, ain't she got a mouth?" "I don't allow anybody to disrespect me," said Jackson. "Least of all a woman." "Least of all," Darrell agreed. He snorted again, then took a handkerchief from his pocket and rubbed his nose with it. "Excuse me." He turned slightly, pressed a finger to one nostril, and with a sharp exhalation fired a little black snot rocket onto the ground, where it proceeded to steam, eating a small hole in the pavement. I heard Emma gag. "Wow," Enoch whispered beside me. He sounded jealous. "That's one nasty habit, Darrell," Jackson said. "It ain't a habit, it's an affliction." Emma took a step toward the men. Bronwyn followed her lead. "So, he's got nuclear phlegm," said Emma to the short one. "What's your peculiarity? Being the planet's biggest asshole?" Darrell burst out laughing. Jackson's smile vanished. He unleaned himself from the patrol car and unbuttoned his holster. Emma and Bronwyn took another step toward them. "I think they want to dance," said Darrell. "Which one you want?" "The littler one," he said, staring at Emma. "I like her mouth." The girls broke into a run toward the two men. Jackson went for his gun, and Emma, who had kept her hot, glowing hands hidden behind her back, whipped them around to her front and grabbed the man's gun as he raised it. The gun instantly melted. As did Jackson's right hand. He fell to the ground, writhing and howling. Darrell dove behind the squad car. Before he could begin firing, Bronwyn rammed the driver's side door with her shoulder. The car skidded sideways, tires squealing, then tipped onto its side and fell over on its roof, pinning the man beneath it. The whole encounter had lasted about 15 seconds. "Holy Mother of Moses!" I heard Adelaide shout, and I turned to see him watching from the doorway of his bungalow. Potts was cheering and cackling in his wheelchair. A few doors down, a woman peeked out of her room. Had to be the Baroness, because she was wearing a sparkly dress and long white gloves, and she sang out, "Thank God!" You have one more line out of it. In a quivering vibrato. "Uh-oh," Bronwyn said, peeking under the car. "Are they dead?" "Close enough," Emma said, giving the short one a nudge with her foot. Miss Billy emerged from behind the trash cans, trailed by her 3 shivering poodles. "There was a third one," she said. "Little skinny fella." Here you go.
Watch out! Sang the Baroness. She was pointing one of her gloved hands toward the loop exit. We heard feet pounding pavement. The third man had jumped from wherever he'd been hiding and was bombing toward the loop exit. "Stop!" Emma shouted and started after him. The guy looked back once, terrified. Then he seemed to make a decision, and he pulled a gun from his waistband and turned to face us. "Get on the ground," he shouted at us. "Don't move a muscle." We put up our hands and did as he asked. From the corner of my eye, I saw Miss Billy dig something out of her purse.
"Here you go, sweeties,"
she said in a high-pitched voice she used with her dogs. The man spun and pointed his gun at her, but when he saw her poodles, he laughed. "You gonna stick them little things on me? You done lost your mind, lady. Now get on the ground over there with the rest of them." Miss Billy raised her hands and walked towards us. Her poodles yipped and scarfed the treats. The man came toward us, cautious, his stiff arms shaking with adrenaline. He saw what we'd done to his friends, and he looked ready to do worse to us. "I'll have the keys to that there automobile," he said. "Somebody toss 'em to me." Enoch took the keys from his pocket and threw 'em. They landed on the pavement near the man's feet. "Good. Now I'll take any money you got." My mind was racing, trying to figure out how we could get out of this. Maybe if we could trick him somehow, lure him closer, then jump him. But no, he'd seen what happened to his friends when they let the girls get near him, and he wasn't going to make the same mistake. "Now!" he screamed and fired his gun into the air. I flinched, my whole body tensing. I hadn't heard a gun fired in months, and I wasn't used to it. I told him I had a few $100s in the car. "Go get it!" Slowly, keeping my hands raised, I got up. "I need the keys. The money's locked in the glove box." "You're a damn liar. I should shoot you right now." He was inching closer to me, closing the gap between us. "Fact, I think I will." Miss Billy put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. The man spun and pointed his gun at her. "Hey, lady, what do you think you're—" And then came a loud, low-pitched panting, and from behind one of the bungalows galloped one of Miss Billy's poodles, only it was 20 times larger than it had been 3 minutes earlier, the size of a full-grown hippopotamus. The man turned, screamed, and aimed his gun at the giant dog. "Shoo! Go on now, shoo!" And then the other 2 dogs appeared, jumping out from between another pair of bungalows and growled like a pair of truck engines. He whirled towards them, and the second his back was turned, the first dog leapt, jaws wide and teeth gleaming, and bit his head off. What remained of him went limp and fell to the ground. "Good girl! Good girl!" Miss Billy cried, clapping her hands. Everyone in the Flamingo began to cheer. My friends got off the ground. "My bird," said Bronwyn. "What kind of dogs are those?" "Colossus poodles," Miss Billy answered. One of them trotted toward me with its mouth open, and I put my arms out and fell back a few steps. Whoa, I think he's still hungry." "Don't run, he'll think it's a game," said Miss Billy. "He's just being friendly." The dog's tongue came at me like a huge pink surfboard and licked my head from neck to scalp. I think I squealed. I was left dripping and grossed out, but grateful to be alive. Miss Billy laughed. "See, he likes you." "Your dog saved us," said Emma. "Thank you." "It was you ladies who gave him the chance," she said. "Thank you both for your bravery, and tell H thanks too when you see him." Adelaide strode across the forecourt, pushing Potts in his wheelchair. "Young people, fine work today." "Yeah, but who's going to clean up this mess?" Potts grumbled. "I don't suppose they'll bother you again,"
Emma said, nodding toward the fallen highwayman. I wouldn't count on it, said Miss Billy. Emma and I took Paul aside. Last chance, Emma said. Would you consider coming with us? He thought for a moment, looking from Emma to Bronwyn to me, then nodded. I'm overdue for a visit home anyhow. Yes! Emma shouted. Portal, here we come. But where's he going to sit? Said Enoch. There's only room for 5. He can sit up front, said Emma, and you can ride in the boot.
Savage.
Oh, thank you for the compliment. We're going to go directly into Chapter 10 because I think we can get through it. I wanted to kind of get through Chapter 9 so we could get through both of them. Because they're both relatively only like 20 pages. So I'm like, yeah, Emma. That's the only reason you're here, isn't it? You can get in the boot. And I was like, oh, Enoch. Gutted. Gutted, my guy. That's so... All right. This is where it gets a little Jim Crow. So I just wanted to preface that in case that makes you uncomfortable. Nothing super happens, but it does have a good nod to the BIPOC experience, if you will. So here we go. Chapter 10. I drove slowly into the dark porte cochere, through which we'd had to push the lamed car a few hours earlier. The Aston purred happily now, thanks to Enoch's know-how and Emma's welding skills. The sudden gravitational rush came as we rolled through the middle of the short tunnel. I gripped the wheel a little tighter against the sensation that the car was falling off a cliff's edge, and then we emerged into the wee hours of the present-day night. I reached to turn on the headlights. Wait, Paul hissed, and I stalled my hand. He pointed out the windshield across the wide field. There. Look. At the truck wash, 2 pairs of headlights were crossed, and silhouetted in them were several men. They'd been waiting, covering the exit. One was holding something near his face that might have been a CB radio. It was unclear if they'd seen us. Floor it, said Enoch. Run 'em over. Don't, said Paul. They've got rifles, and they're good shots. There's too much ground to cover to get clear of them. Then back up, said Emma. It's not worth the risk. I decided she was right. Like all loops, there was a front way out and a back way out. Through the day, that was looped. The trouble with going out the back way was that you then had to travel through the past. And the trouble with the past, at least the last 100 years or so, was that it was full of hollows. But that was a problem I was uniquely equipped to handle. So I put the Aston in reverse and rolled us backward through the loop entrance. In a moment, we returned to the daylit world of Miss Billy's motel. Back so soon? She said, walking her dogs toward us. They had already begun to shrink. In a few hours, I guessed, they would be nipping at her heels again. There are more highwaymen out there, Paul said, leaning through his open window. They must have put a call out for reinforcements. I wish we could take you all with us, I told Miss Billy. Miss Billy shrugged. As long as my dog treats hold out, we'll be all right. We'll ask H to send you more as soon as he can, Emma said. I'd appreciate that. Can you show us the back way out of here? I said. Sure, said Miss Billy. Though by taking it you're risking your lives. There were shadow creatures everywhere back in 65, even down here in Florida. We'll be okay, I said. I've got a nose for hollows. Miss Billy stood a little straighter.
You're like H? He's like Abe, Emma said proudly. Don't know him, but if H trusts you enough to hire you, I guess you know what you're doing. And of course, them boys outside wouldn't dare follow you into hollow territory. They'll soil their damn undies rather than face those creatures.
She gave us quick directions, past the garage, down Main Street, right at the courthouse.
And when you feel the pop in your ears, you know you passed through the membrane.
We thanked her again, but there was no time for long goodbyes. Anyway, most of the Flamingo's residents were in hiding after the terrifying events of that morning, though a few shouted good luck to us as we curved around the highwayman's patrol car and drove out of the forecourt. I couldn't help thinking that they were the ones who needed luck, and a good deal more, stuck here at the mercy of thugs. We drove down Main Street. I kept one eye on my mirrors as we went, half expecting to see another old squad car pull into view. When we turned right at the courthouse, I felt my stomach drop, and there was a ripple in the air like a heat wave. But nothing had changed. At least, nothing we could see. "We're out," said Paul, his tone an odd mix of relief and dread. We had passed through the membrane and out of the protective boundaries of the loop. Now time would march forward day by day, and hollows, if there were any to be found, would be coming for us. I had to remind myself that they were no less deadly for being historical, and my hand drifted involuntarily to my stomach as I surveyed it for any unusual twinges. For now, there was nothing. We passed in and out of small towns, riding mostly in silence, just processing the crazy events of the past day. We were tired, too. Not only had what happened at the motel been emotionally and physically exhausting, but it was late, midday here, by nearly midnight back in the present. To think that we had discovered my grandfather's safe house the same day was unfathomable. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then.
We should call home, Bronwyn said. Tell everyone we're okay. They're probably worried.
We can't, said Millard.
We're in 1965, so we'd be calling Jacob's house in 1965. Oh, replied Bronwyn. Right.
I glanced at her in the rear view and caught a glimpse of Emma. She wore an intense but inscrutable expression, like she was wrestling with an uncomfortable thought. Then she saw me and her face went blank. There was a brief silence that I'm sure felt normal to everyone except me and Emma, and then Emma said,
Paul, how far is your loop?
Should get there by sundown, he said.
Can you point out the town it's in on our map?
With some effort, she pulled out the road atlas and found the page for Georgia. There was hardly room to move in the back, with 4 people crammed into 3 seats. Emma passed the map to Paul. It's right here, Paul said, tapping a mostly blank space halfway between Atlanta and Savannah. Enoch shifted his legs and leaned over to look, then laughed. You're kidding. Someone hit a time loop in a town called Portal? Actually, the town's named after the loop, Paul said, or so the story goes. Are there peculiar thugs and highwaymen in Portal, Georgia? Asked Millard. Surely aren't, he said. That's why the Embryon who started our loop made it move around from day to day, so nobody malintentioned could find it.
Which Embryon made it? Asked Millard.
Her name was Miss Honeythrush, but I never met her. We use a loop keeper now, just like most folks do.
Do you know what happened to her?
He shook his head. I don't.
But Miss Annie might. We can ask her. I hope you'll be able to stay and rest a while. I doubt we'll be able to stay long, Emma said. We're getting an important mission.
Rest. The very word sounded so delicious that I started daydreaming about beds and pillows and soft sheets. I realized that if I was going to get us all the way to Portal, Georgia without driving us into a tree, I needed coffee, and I needed it soon. But first, I wanted to put some distance between us and Stark, so I waited until we were near the Georgia border before I started scanning for coffee shops. They were fairly plentiful, this being a time before commercial coffee chains had colonized every street corner. That said, these towns seemed more populated and prosperous here in 1965. They all had a bank, a hardware store, a doctor's office, a couple of restaurants, a movie theater, and a lot more too. Not just some shuttered stores and a big box shopping center on the outskirts. It didn't take a genius to see the connection. When I could no longer stop myself from nodding off at the wheel, I pulled over at the next likely looking place. It was called Johnny's Bright Spot. "Who wants coffee?" I said. "I'm dying here." Everyone raised a hand but Paul. "I'm not a coffee drinker," he said. "Have a sandwich then," I said. "It's lunchtime." "No, thanks. I'll just wait here." "We should all stay close to Jacob," said Emma, "just in case there are any hollows around." Paul folded his hands in his lap and stared down at them. "I can't go in there," he said finally. "Why is he being difficult?" said Enoch. And then I realized why, and a shudder of revulsion went through me. "They won't let him," I said. "What do you mean?" said Enoch, irritated. Paul looked angry and embarrassed. "Because I'm black," he said quietly. "What the hell does that have to do with anything?" said Enoch. Millard sighed. "Enoch isn't a great student of history." "It's 1965, I said. "We're in the deep South." I felt awful that this hadn't occurred to me sooner. "That's terrible," said Bronwyn. "It makes me sick," said Emma. "How can you treat people like that?" "Are you sure they won't let you in?" said Enoch, peering at the diner's window. "I don't see a sign or anything." "They don't need one," said Paul. "This is a white town." "How can you tell?" said Enoch. Paul's head snapped up. "Because it's nice." "Oh," said Enoch, chastened. "Hologasts aren't the only reason I don't like traveling to the past," said Paul. "They're not even the biggest reason." He drew in a deep breath and looked down again, and when he looked up a moment later, he'd stuffed his feelings away somewhere deep. He waved his hand. "You all just go on in. I'll wait here." "Forget it," Emma said. "I wouldn't eat here if I was dying of starvation." "Me neither," I said. I wasn't tired anymore, just pissed off and deeply unsettled. I had grown up in the American South, a weird, tropical version of it, filled with transplants from other parts of the country, but still, the South. But I'd never really confronted its ugly past. I'd never been forced to. I was a wealthy white kid in a mostly white town. I felt ashamed that I had never really reckoned with it, never imagined what a simple road trip through my own state might have been like for anyone who didn't look like me. And not just in the past, because just because Jim Crow was dead didn't mean racism was. Hell, in some parts of the country, those laws were still officially on the books. "What if we burned the place down?" Enoch suggested. "It would only take like a minute." "That would accomplish nothing," said Millard. "The past..." I know, the past heals itself." "The past," Paul shook his head, It's nothing but an open wound.
What he meant was that you can't change the past, said Bronwyn.
I know what he meant, Paul said, and then went quiet again. There was a sudden sharp knock on my window. I turned to see a man in an apron and a paper hat staring at us, one hand on the car's roof. I rolled my window down a few inches. "Help you?" he said, no trace of a smile. "We were just leaving," I said. "Mm-hmm." His eyes slid to the back seat, then to the passenger seat. "You kids old enough to drive?" "Yeah," I said. "It's your car."
"Of course. Are you a cop or something?" asked Emma.
He ignored her. "What model vehicle is this?" 1979 Aston Martin Vantage, Enoch said quickly. Then his eyes widened as he realized his mistake. The man stared at us for a moment, expressionless. "You a comedian?" He straightened and waved someone down. "Carl!" A police officer had just turned a corner at the end of the block. He pivoted and started heading towards us. "Start the car!" Emma hissed. I turned the key. The engine made a noise loud enough to wake the dead, and the man stumbled back. When he regained his balance, he tried to reach through my window, but the gap was too small to get his arm through. I put the car in reverse and started to roll, and he swore and yanked his arm out before it could get ripped off. The downside of the Aston's fat, growly engine note was how thirsty it was, and in the 7 hours it took to reach Portal, we had to stop twice to fill the tank. In those days, you didn't pump your own gas, so we had to endure nosy questions from both station attendants while they did it for us. This being the South, they were slow about it too. They pumped slowly and talked slowly and made change slowly and offered to check the oil and tires and wash the windshield and 20 other unnecessary things, all just an excuse to walk around the car and study it and us from every angle. It could have been a good opportunity to get out and stretch our legs and pee, but we didn't have clothes for 1965, and besides, I had no interest in using a bathroom that Paul couldn't use, and I knew the others felt the same. Instead, we stopped to relieve ourselves in an orange grove along the Georgia border, scattering among the trees and coming back with handfuls of ripe fruit, which we ate as we drove, juice running down our chins and peels flying out the windows. The only ones who got out were Emma and Enoch. They went into the second filling station and returned after a few minutes with 3 coffees and styrofoam cups to share among us. After we pulled away, there was an awkward, sullen mood in the car, most of it emanating from Emma. Bronwyn, who was sitting beside her in the back, asked if she was okay, and she said yes in a way that sounded like no, but didn't elaborate.
I just looked up the card, that's all, sorry.
The oranges and coffee were enough to sustain me through the rest of the drive, and the drive was tedious. The interstate highway system was not yet complete in 1965, which meant we had to wend our way down bad country roads through stoplight-infested towns, and because our car attracted a lot of attention to begin with, exotic-looking in 1979, the Aston was positively futuristic in 1965. I had to be careful to drive under the speed limit, despite a constant temptation to stomp my foot down on the gas just to hear that thirsty V8 engine purr. We were stuck in 1965 until we found a loop that could connect us back to the present. Preferably, it would be Paul's loop, and getting to Portal a little faster was definitely not worth the Dukes of Hazzard-style car chase it was likely to provoke. We finally reached Portal as evening was approaching. It was a nowhere within a nowhere. Low hills stippled with cornfields and circled by deep woods. A strangely named town hidden among towns with names nearly as strange. Need more, Thrift, Hope You Like It, Santa Claus, no kidding. The weird names acting, I suppose, as a sort of camouflage. The town boundary was marked with a bullet-pocked sign that read, "Welcome to Portal," though I didn't see any town beyond it, just more cornfields. Millard cleared his throat and turned to Paul. "You said the entrance point changes?" "It does," he said. "Now, could you stop here?" Paul said. "I'll need to fetch my rod." I braked and pulled onto the shoulder. Paul got out and walked to the portal sign. He took a small key out of his coat, knelt down and fit it into the base of a wooden signpost, and unlocked a hidden door. From a narrow compartment inside it, he removed what looked like a wooden orb and an armload of oddly shaped sticks. "What on earth is he up to?" Emma muttered. Paul attached the larger stick to the orb, connected two smaller sticks, then screwed them both into the top of it. It looked like some bizarre root vegetable that had sprouted a pair of antennae. He started walking back toward the car with the thing held aloft. Before he'd reached us, the rod jerked to the right. He stopped and gripped it with both hands. It began to vibrate, and then it looked like the rod nearly flew away from him. He planted his feet and leaned back, and the rod pointed its antenna somewhere behind us. After a moment, the rod stopped vibrating, and he lowered it and walked back to the car. "It's juiced up today," Paul said, laughing. He got in, hung the rod and the upper half of his body out the window, and let the rod point the way as I drove. When it jerked suddenly to the right, Paul cried, "That way!" and I hung a quick right down a dirt road. After about a half mile, it pulled sharply to the left, pointing into a field of corn. "Left!" Paul cried. I looked at him doubtfully. Through the field?" The crop had been harvested and bundled, and what was left were rows of stubble and little pyramids of corn that stretched away over a low hill and out of sight. And there's a picture of Paul with his weird root vegetable rod.
Divining rod.
Divining rod. Only it's crazy.
Yeah, that's all weird.
Can you see it too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's up.
Whoop. "Loop entrance is somewhere over that way," Paul said, the rod pulling his arm so hard I worried it might dislocate his shoulder. I gazed across the rough, uneven ground. "I don't want to mess the car up." "Yes, don't," said Enoch. "You'll throw the wheels out of alignment, or worse." "Can't we just walk into the loop?" asked Millard. "You can't leave this car outside the loop," said Paul. "If someone finds it, they'll know just where to look for the entrance." "You said there were no highwaymen around here," I said. "There aren't usually, but one could be following us." "Oh, well then," I put the car into gear. "I'll try to be gentle." "Actually," Paul said, "don't be. Our loop is such that such a big, heavy thing needs a lot of momentum to get inside. You'd better go as fast as you can." I felt a smile forming on my face. "Well, if I have to." "If you break the car, you're fixing it this time," Enoch grumbled. "Oh, fun," said Bronwyn, rubbing her hands together. "Everybody hang on," I said. "Ready?" Paul leaned back out the window with the divining rod gripped in both hands, his back pressed against the door jamb and his feet planted against the inside of the windshield. He looked at me and nodded. Ready? I revved the engine twice, let off the brake, jammed my foot down on the gas, and we took off through the cornfield. Suddenly everything was vibrating. The car, the steering wheel, my teeth. To the right, Paul shouted, and I veered right around a corn pyramid. Left, he said, leaning way out the window. The tires sprayed jets of dirt behind us. Stands of unharvested corn drummed the car's undercarriage and slapped against Paul's body. Now way straight, he said. Now stay straight, he yelled, when we were aimed directly at one of the corn pyramids, which was fast approaching. I have to turn, I shouted. Straight, I said, straight. I fought an overwhelming instinct to cut the wheel. The corn pyramid came rushing towards us, and everyone but Paul screamed. There was an instant of blackness like a missing frame in a movie, and then a moment of weightlessness and a pressure change. Then the corn pyramid was gone, and the field we were hurtling through was nothing but dirt. Paul pulled himself back inside the car and shouted, Okay, brake, you should brake. And I hit the brake as we crested a rise. All four wheels of the car left the ground for a second, and when we landed again, I felt the car bottom out before we skidded to a stop. Oh, Millard groaned from the back seat. Dust swirled in the air. The engine ticked. We had come to rest by an old red barn at the edge of a little town. Paul opened his door and stepped out. Welcome to Portal. Oh, thank Hades, said Millard. He shoved his way out of the car, and a moment later I heard him throwing up. Everyone got out, grateful to have solid ground beneath their feet. The car's windows had been open as we barreled through the field, and now everyone was covered in a film of dust and sweat. I raked a hand down my face, and my fingers came away gritty. Now you've got stripes, Emma said, using her sleeve to wipe my cheek. You can clean up at my house, said Paul, and he waved us after him. There's the cornfield. Oh my gosh. If you ever needed just a random picture of a cornfield.
Old school cornfield.
Old cornfield. We followed him into town. It was all of 3 blocks from end to end and looked as if it had been made entirely, but expertly, by hand. From the houses to the packed dirt streets to the wooden sidewalks. It was 1935 here, Paul explained. And the loop at Portal had been made in the worst depths of the Great Depression. Despite all that, it was neat as a pin, and everywhere someone could have planted flowers or painted a happy color, it had been done. And the dozen or so people I saw walking were all dressed to the nines. It was a cheerful, homey place, and I already wished we didn't have to leave it in such a hurry. Paul Helmsley, someone shouted. Uh-oh, I heard Paul mutter. A teenage girl came running toward him. She wore a crisp white dress and a fashionable floppy hat, and there was fire in her eyes. You don't call, you don't write. Sorry I'm late, Aline. Late? She took off the hat and swatted him with it. You've been gone 2 years. I got hung up. I'm about to hang you up, she said, and he leapt off the sidewalk as she swatted at him again. She huffed, then turned to us and nodded. Aline Norcross, pleased to meet you. Before any of us could reply, 2 other girls who looked about Aline's age ran up. Paul introduced them as June and Fern, his sisters. They wrapped Paul in fierce embraces, berated him for being gone so long, then turned to us.
Thank you for bringing him back, said Fern. I hope he didn't cause you too much trouble.
Not at all, I said. He did us a huge favor.
Yeah, said Bronwyn. We needed to find this place, but we thought we were looking for an actual portal, not a town called Portal, because we have the owl.
Emma had pinched her on the arm, and now she walked on tiptoes to whisper something in Bronwyn's ear. Even Paul didn't know about H or about the package we were here to deliver. We had agreed to follow H's advice and keep that information to ourselves until we knew where to deliver it. Bronwyn scowled at Emma, and Emma scowled back at her. Here's a picture of his three sisters. We have an important meeting here, I said. Fern perked up.
Oh, yes, with who?
With whom? Said June.
With
Whom? Said Fern, sounding like an owl.
With whomever is in charge, said Emma. I guess you don't have an Embrin, but is there someone close to that?
Miss Annie, said June. Fern and Aline nodded in agreement.
Miss Annie's been here longer than anyone. You got a question, you need advice, you go to her.
Can we meet her now? Said Emma. The girls looked at one another, and something passed silently between them. I think she's sleeping, Aline said.
But stay for supper, said Fern. Elmer's serving up his famous 72-hour lamb, and Miss Annie hates to miss it.
Spit roasted, said June. Falls right off the bone. I looked at Emma. She shrugged. It looked like we were staying for supper. We followed Paul through town. He slowed as we approached a young man kneeling by a seriously cute puppy. Brother Reggie, Paul called out. You teach him to roll over yet? Hey, look who's back, the boy said, looking up and giving Paul a salute. Not yet. He's a good pup, but I think his brain's too small.
Oh, that's cruel, said Bronwyn.
I don't mean to be, said Reggie. I just have to let him out of this loop for a while so he can get bigger. He won't grow here.
I didn't think of that, said Bronwyn.
Here's a puppy. Oh, look at the baby. Puppy. Look at the baby. Reggie and a puppy. Baby. A lot of puppies in this chapter, man. A lot of puppies. We've gotten collectively like 4 dogs in this chapter alone, which is 4 more dogs than any other chapter, in all honesty.
Yeah, they have to make up for the
There's
lack
only
of
one
someone.
other dog, and that's Miss Wren. Anyway.
Gotta make up for him.
That's why you almost never see babies in loops, Emma explained. It's considered immoral to keep them that young for an unnaturally long time.
A minute later, we passed a little white boy standing at an open window in a clapboard house. He wore antiquated headphones and seemed deep in concentration. Paul raised a hand and the boy leaned out the window and waved. What are they saying today, Holly? Paul called out. The boy slipped his headphones off. Nothing interesting, he replied glumly. Talking about money again. Better luck tomorrow, then. You coming to supper? He nodded forcefully. Yep. As we walked away, Paul explained. That's my brother Holly. His peculiarity lets him eavesdrop on the dead over the radio.
I'm confused, said Emma, turning to look back at Holly. He's your brother?
Oh, we're none of us blood family,
Paul said. Most of us are diviners, though, and that's close enough. And diviners can all do the same thing? Well, there's differences. No two diviners are gifted in exactly the same way. Aline can find water in a desert. Fern and June specialize in finding lost people. Holly dials into spiritual frequencies. And there are even those of us who can read hearts, tell if someone loves you or not. Paul nodded to an old woman sitting in a rocking chair in the alley between two close-set houses. She wore glasses over an eye patch, but she seemed to see us well enough despite it, and raised her hand in a silent hello. Something kept my gaze locked on her, and I turned to keep her in my sights as we passed. "What about you?" Millard said to Paul. "I divine doors. That's why I can always find my way home. Speaking of which," we had arrived at a house with flowers in its postage-stamped yard and curtains in the windows. "We kept it nice for you," said June. "Like the curtains?" "They're lovely." "Figured you'd come back eventually," said Fern. "I wasn't so sure," Aline muttered. Paul stepped onto his porch, then turned back to face us. He looked delighted. "Well, don't just stand there. Come on in and get washed up for supper." And here are a bunch of pictures. And that is the end of chapter 10. I do not know how long chapter 11 is. I thought we were going to run later. I read really fast today. I did a good job today, sort of. This is footage 300. What page are we on? Ooh. Do I think I can make it through another 20 pages? I didn't prep this one. I have no idea what... I don't know. There's a few pictures in here, which might... God damn it. I can't do the Southmore. I can't do it. Do you know how long it took me to erase pictures from my fucking vocabulary? It's pictures. It's pictures. I should not do this.
Yeah. Do cat facts. Cat facts.
I can't do a southern accent for that long without, like, weirdly reverting. It's
fine.
I just said pictures. I fucking hate my life. Okay. No, I don't. That's not true.
What'd they say?
Nothing. I'm like, that's so negative. I trained myself out of it through a lot of hard work. I know how to speak now. I do not. It is just the light. It's purple and it makes my hair look blue. I didn't dye it. I don't have any dye. I would love to dye my hair. Can I do that? I don't think so.
I'll check at my house, see if I have any dye.
It's fine. Because I don't know if I can. Because I have no idea how long Nate's going to be hanging out at the shop. And I don't want to get any more attention
Yeah, that's
than
fair.
I need. I don't want to do that.
That's completely fair.
Oh, thank you for the gingerbread man.
Coffee. Remember, that's a smoothie.
Pictures. I don't like southern accent. And it's the only one I'm good at. So you'd think I should appreciate it more that they gave me so many southern people all at the same time. Because it's the only accent I can do. I hate it. It's fun. I like the characters. I hate the accent. Oh my god. Fucking Christ. worst. Okay, it's fine. We're gonna do cat facts. Who wants to know things about different breeds of cats? This guy. Me. And maybe some of you. Anyway, I have a book filled with cats, and we're going through every breed of cat very slowly. Today we're doing the Chaucy.
That was me.
Okay, I was like, what was that?
That was me.
I thought that was an animal. There's so many animals in this house.
That was me. Sorry.
The Chaucy, pronounced, well, that's, I would assume it's pronounced Chaucy. I don't know. Anyway, has probably, I didn't look it up before I did this because I'm dumb and I forgot. I forgot where the book was until Dad got here. So I sat down and I was like, where's the giant cat book? So I didn't look any. Normally I look them up beforehand, and I didn't today. So if it's wrong, it's wrong. Don't make me feel bad. Maybe. The Chaucy has probably been around for several thousand years, dating back to ancient Egypt. Egyptians were known to keep cats as pets, forming such strong bonds with their feline friends that they often chose to mummify them after death. It is likely that the domestic cats kept by the Egyptians eventually mated with a species of wild cat found in the Nile Delta, known as Felis chaus, or jungle cat. From this pairing, the Chaucy was created. But it wasn't until 1990 that breeders became serious about preserving and developing the breed. And in 1995, the Chaucy was officially recognized as a domestic breed by the International Cat Association. Although Chaucys come in a variety of colors, only 3 brown tick tabby, solid black, and grizzled tabby are accepted at cat shows. Their angular cheekbones, large tufted ears, and gold or green eyes give them a striking appearance and hint at their wild origins. Since the Chaucy is a hybrid between the jungle cat and domestic cats, several different breeds, including Abyssinian and Oriental Shorthair, have been used to produce Chaucys. To be eligible for competition, the International Cat Association requires that the cats be 4th-generation Chaucys and that they must be several generations removed from their jungle cat ancestors. As descendants of these wild cats, it might be assumed that Chaucys are standoffish with their human companions, but nothing is further from the truth. This intelligent, playful breed loves the company of humans and other animals, preferring not to be alone and displaying loyalty to its owners. Thank you. I didn't look it up because I forgot. But there's a picture. It's adorable. So cute. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't look anything up before I did this. Normally I'd put more effort into it. I had a long week. And we're not talking about it. But at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and probably transfer over to Discord. I'll check out the next chapter and see how long. I think eventually the Southern stops. I just don't remember how long it lasts. Like how many actual chapters there are.
How many times you got twang and speaking slow and be quiet?
Oh my god.
Possible.
It's like Bardstown. No.
Oh, it's worse. No.
So much worse.
No, that's like Slidell.
Shut up. Stop talking like that.
Sorry. My bad.
Do it right. Sorry, I'm losing my mind.
My bad. That is like Slidell, Louisiana.
It's just me impersonating every Southern person I've ever met, and I've met a lot of them. It's a whole problem.
That's what happens when we live in the South.
No, not that. No.
What?
Nothing. I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't think so. Anyway. Eventually, 10 minutes later, an hour later, 65 years later.
Shut up. Okay, now we're gonna move over to Discord, because we got video games to play. We can either play Cult of the Lamb again, or we can play Outer Worlds. I don't know. We'll decide in the car. And, shut up. And also, Dad, unrelated, sort of related, but Dad brought scones, and I didn't get the chance to eat one before I did this. And I was a little mad about it, so I actually want to go, like, eat a scone, and then I'll start doing things. I've had a long week, and I deserve a scone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling it. Anyway. So, I will see you in there in maybe about 10-15 minutes after I eat my scone. Anyway, and then we'll decide in the car what we're going to play. So yeah, if you don't know where to find the Discord, it should be in my TikTok description. You all know. You know how to get there. You're fine. I don't need to worry about any of y'all. So we're going to do that, and if you liked what you saw and you're new and you want more of it, you can go to my YouTube, link is in my TikTok. I also do this every single week, so you can join us next week at 8 Central for some more bullshit of me reading to you nonsense. Thank you guys, and I will see you guys next week.